just how do we interpret neuroscience? It seems like everyone wants to have a part of the brain these days. Every advertiser wants to scan someone's brain, or it's like brain scans show that you'll really enjoy this particular brand of ice cream. Or you go on the internet and it seems like there's all kinds of ads on, buy this so you can train your brain. So how can we tell what is good from what is false or, at best, overstatement? This actually comes from an article I was asked to write. So this article was published in the last year in a journal called Dialogue. Principles that to keep in mind when you hear pronouncements from neuroscience, to be able to tell what's good and what's bad. Scientists say that 82% of people will believe anything you tell them if you start the sentence with scientists say. And if you believe this statement, then you just proved the point. You see a lot of neuroscience in the news. A couple years back, there was a lot of hype about the God spot. They scanned and found a particular spot in the brain that seemed to light up with people engaged in spiritual activities. Whatever that particular definition happens to be. And they said, oh, there's the spot in the brain that causes someone to believe in God. I've heard this for years. You only use 10% of your brain. Another one that's pretty popular, especially when I had a kid. You better play him Mozart. He'll be smarter. This has been around a while. Right-brained people are more creative. Left-brained people are more logical. So are you a right brain or a left brain person? Criminals have unique brain formations that cause them to commit crimes. This is actually big in law. There's a whole branch starting called neuro law. It's like, how can I use brain scans to get my client off? And this doesn't directly deal with neuroscience, but it illustrates a lot of principles that I'm talking about. This was just in the last few weeks, all over the news. Atheist children are more generous than religious children. That even made the cover of Time. So, which of these are true and which of these are false? All of them are false. Every last one. As I go through these principles, you see why, and I'll explain them. So know how to read these pronouncements so you can separate what's the treasure from none. With a pile of poop. If there's only one thing to remember from this evening, this is kind of a key one. This is how scientific pronouncements work. I'll explain it if you can't read the small print. You have a researcher, and I'll use the example of the atheist children study. You have a researcher that does his research, and he usually probably does quite good. Most scientists are quite good in their research, and they publish a study that says, okay, we had a group of 1,000 or so children, ages 5 to 12, big range, and we gave them stickers, and they were told, some anonymous kid who's exactly like you didn't get stickers, how many do you want to share? Put them in this envelope. And so the kids would put a few stickers to share in the envelope, and then give it to the researcher, and they would count the stickers. This one gave 7, this one gave 3, this one gave 2. And then they matched it to whether the child came from a religious household or a non-religious household. And then said, okay, in general, the non-religious kids tended to give more stickers to a kid who was exactly like themselves. And so the researcher publishes this in a batch of 5 to 12. The non-religious children generally shared more stickers with a hypothetical child than those who are from a religious household. That's the study. But then studies go to the university's PR department. Universities have that. And so what could often be an intern who is not trained in sciences writes the PR piece for whatever study comes across their desk. And so they write the big thing. So the scientist qualifies his statement, and that's just what it is. And the PR department says, religious, in big words, religious kids less generous, and in the small print say, in these circumstances, in this group, in this situation. And then the news people scan the PR pieces and say, oh, and then by the time they pick it up, any specific qualifiers are dropped out, and then it becomes the big news item, religious kids less generous. And so that's the typical way that scientific pronouncement works. Through the PR department, then to the news, and then it hits the internet. And who knows what it becomes after it hits the internet. Doom, religion's corrupting our kids by the time it hits the internet. But that's what people see, and that's what they tend to believe. So most scientists do a good job, but the popular reporting of their study may be flawed or leave out key details. And so it's important to check the source. If something sounds fishy, look it up. Check the original, and the BS meter. Where does this particular study fall? And so that's the first principle I talk about, is to check the source. Actually, that Time magazine said that religion makes children meaner. Straight from the article in Time. But I already explained the method of that study. The study was 2015, the negative association between religiousness and children's altruism across the world. In the journal Current Biology. And I mentioned the method, 1,200 kids, ages 5 to 12. So they did have a good sample size. Give them that. And they gave them the stickers. There was a second part to the study, is that the children were shown a video of one kid pushing another. And they were asked to judge the situation and prescribe punishment. And the religious kids typically prescribed a harsher punishment. And so the headline became, religious children are meaner. Well, the conclusions were, religious children judge the one doing harm more harshly by advocating for harsher punishment, and religious children shared fewer stickers with anonymous children just like them. I can only please one person today. Today I choose me. But if you look at the conclusions, and I'm going through this to illustrate the points on how to be critical on the study. So religious children judge the one doing harm more harshly. If you look at the study, what does harshly mean? They never say. Alternative explanations are not explored and they're not ruled out. Are religious children actually meaner? Or do they have a greater sense of empathy for a victim? And a greater sense of right and wrong. So they advocate for a harsher punishment because they feel more strongly to the victim. Do non-religious children just not care? There's other ways you can spin the results. We just don't know. Or the conclusion of atheist children sharing more stickers with a kid from the same school and same race. Well, you could say, were atheist children more racist? They would only share more with those of the same race. You could spin the study that way. It would still be an improper conclusion. And any difference between 5-year-old versus 12-year-olds, how they regard stickers? Were all the 5-year-olds the religious ones and all the 12-year-olds the non-religious ones? 12-year-olds, stickers? I don't care. Give them all away. The 5-year-olds, stickers? Hoarding. They don't parse out the different ages. They just lump them all together. With a 3-year-old, there's a big difference between younger and older kids. That's a big source of error in the study. And then what does religious mean? What is more religious or less religious? They don't define that either. So impartial scientists seem to regard this study as not very good. But it was all over the news. The original study had poor methods and actually said nothing positive or negative about atheism or religion. But yet it got all over the news and now everyone believes it. You have to check the source. Yep, as good as it looks. If it seems fishy, check the original study out for yourself to see if it is what the popular reports are actually saying. What I find difficult about this, though, is when I see a popular report, they often don't even list the journal it comes from. Why not? Yeah, are they trying to avoid being questioned? I'd say if the study says comes from this journal and this date, it might be a little more accurate. The second principle, the brain's telling me, you should lie down and try to go to sleep, so then I can remind you of all your problems. That's how it seems to work sometimes. This particular principle says the neural correlate of an experience reveals little. This is where they find the part of the brain that lights up when you do something or feel something or have a religious experience. They stick you in a scanner, tell you to think of loving your spouse, and then they say, whoa, there's the spot for love. And so when researchers found this, what they call the God spot, the area of the brain that activated with religion, some people said, this proves that God is all in your head. But yet some other people said, this proves that God is real. You see part of the brain that lights up. But it proves nothing. Everything will light up some part of your brain. It should not be a surprise. If I pet my cat, if I play with my son, or if I read the newspaper, a part of my brain will light up. It doesn't mean that my son, the newspaper, does not exist. It just means that's the spot that lights up when I do this. But a study that shows that areas of the brain activating with religion, they can conclude these are the areas of the brain that might be associated with particular religious activities. That's all they can conclude. Anything else goes way beyond the data. So finding a spot that lights up on a brain scan really doesn't tell us all that much. Except, oh, that's the spot that's associated with that. It could be the spot where God's interacting with a person. Knowing the biology of an experience does not explain it away. All activities and thoughts activate the brain in some way. Comes to the next principle. In a scientific study, definitions need to be specific. I'm a huge metal fan. What do you know? Me too. You have to have specific definitions. As one researcher put it, a lot of scientists in the lab are inventing their own definitions wholesale and then trying to measure for it. Because there is absolutely no agreed upon definition of what various emotions are, what various psychological experiences are. There's no agreed upon definition. People don't agree, but yet they're scanning for this. I used the love study. This is a famous one in 2004. Researchers discovered the part of the brain that causes love. Appropriate for Valentine's Day coming up. And the famous study studied 17 people. That tells me there's a problem, very small sample size. And what they did is they shoved them in a scanner and showed them pictures of their loved ones and showed them pictures of unknown strangers. And then tried to figure out, okay, what part of the brain is lighting up when they're shown loved ones that's different from being shown random people. And so then they said, we found love. But what is love? What is romantic love? Is it commitment, sexual attraction, friendship, trust, familiarity, romance, a mixture of all of this? What are you actually scanning for? This little thing here. Love your woman, leave the seat down. And is love the same for everyone? Or back to the God spot study in 1997. The God spot is found in the brain. This is a book cover pulled straight from Amazon. Your God spot, how the brain makes and shapes all forms of faith. Based on this study, proof that God is all in your head, some headline said. And in 2008 they came out, well, the God spot was an overstatement, sorry. It's disproved. The books are still on Amazon, by the way. They concluded, religion is a complex phenomena involving the entire brain, and this neither proves or disproves religion. God is here. The basis of the study comes from, they stuffed nuns and monks in a scanner and told them to pray. And they looked for what lighted up. That's what the study was. No. That comes back to the definition. What is religious experience and what are they scanning for? When they say they found religion, what did they find? Was it feeling that you're receiving strength, comfort, or joy? That's part of religion. Is it your doctrinal belief? Is it a feeling of oneness with ultimate reality? Is it feeling insignificant in front of the majesty of a superior being? Someone receiving an insight? Interpreting an everyday experience with religious meaning? A community experience throughout history? A combination? Is religion any ideology? Does it happen to be prayer or a different spiritual activity? What in the world were they even scanning for? To claim we found religion. A good study will actually define, this is what we looked for, and this is how we define it. What exactly are you testing? There's no agreed upon definition of love, fear, religion, hate, happiness. Researchers will often find them in different places because they define them differently. In the comic, you just told him to sit, you didn't tell him where. I use my own example. Say you scan and find an area correlated with prayer. Someone's praying, that part of the scan lights up. Is that prayer? Or is it prayer when combined with claustrophobia, loud noises, and fear? You might have forgotten about some jewelry, and this magnet is going to yank it right out of me when you're stuffed in that scanner. And then two, did your thoughts ever happen to wander while they tell you to think about praying? I know wandering thoughts and prayer, I struggle with that sometimes. And so when you're doing scanning, brain scans also have some severe limitations. They're very pretty. Advertisers love to use them. And so a lot of scientists have come to describe different pictures like this as brain porn. Not particularly useful, but the public likes to look at it. The basics of how a scan works is all these pretty little colorful pictures have to do with the amount of oxygen that's in your blood. They measure what's the amount of oxygen in your blood, and then see how much oxygen is being used, and then measure the blood that has little oxygen. And so they assume, basically it's just telling you what areas of the brain are using the most oxygen. And they assume that is where the most activity is taking place. So the measurements are actually oxygen measurements in the blood. And so if there's a difference, say they tell you to pray and then stop praying, they look at what the difference is between the two times and figure the difference is probably what's associated with prayer or whatever activity they've asked you to do. Then the final scan is averaged, standardized, corrected, and noise reduced. It has to go through a lot of filters to produce the final image. Because here's the kicker. Every person is different. If you go in for brain surgery, they do not use a standard map. Well, this is the textbook. This is where the textbook tells me that should be, so poke. They test your brain where things are every single time for every single person in brain surgery. Because the surgeon knows everyone's brain is different. There is no standard brain. And so they scan a bunch of people. They have to average them across. Because sometimes it's located here on one person and another spot for another person, because everyone's different. So these are an average. And a scan is often not the same not only from one person to the next, but a scan could be different on the same person on Monday to Wednesday. The same person's scan can be different. That makes making conclusions from brain scans terribly hard. Because a brain can reorganize over the next couple days. And there's a thing called the training effect. If they ask you to do something new, it'll light up one part of the brain. But once it becomes trained, it lights up a different part of the brain. So your experimental subject, if it's all new to them, okay, you have one scan, but if you ask them to do it a few times, then it becomes trained, and the brain just shifts to somewhere else. Try to catch it here, oh, now it's there. Because the person's become trained. It's called the training effect. And then you have, once you get the scan, it's up to the researcher to figure out what level is significant. So they get a bunch of numbers, and then they have to color them. Say, okay, at what number level is good? I'll color that green. What's the next level that I want to set? I'll color that blue. Oh, this one must be really significant. I'll color that red. So they basically go back and do a paint by numbers. Actually, what they do is they program the colors in the beginning to what levels they want. And it's often it was described to me by a neuroscientist that this is an art more than a particular standard. You have to just kind of sense what levels you want to hit. You set the levels too high, you're going to get no results. You set the levels too low, everything is going to fire. And you get way too much results everywhere. So where do you set it? This is the dead salmon experiment. One neuroscientist was frustrated and wanted to illustrate the point of making other scientists realize they need to be careful in how they set their values. And so this study was published in an academic journal. The scientist threw a dead salmon into the brain scanner. A dead salmon. He picked it up from the frozen food section. In the scanner you go. And then sat down and tried to repeat that same love study on facial recognition, social recognition, showing the salmon pictures of certain people and other people. Mr. Dead Salmon, here's someone and here's another person. This might be a stranger, but you met this person in the food aisle. And he actually got colors. Because he deliberately was not careful in his noise reduction and setting his values. And so he published this study saying, this is the area of a dead salmon's brain that recognizes humans. Because you can see the recognition. We got color. And that has been a big caution for all scientists to say, you have to be careful how you set your values. Because really, you can set your values at a certain place and get anything you want. You can find what you're looking for if you set your values at a certain place. But you may not be accurate, as this poor dead salmon, now famous dead salmon, shows. This here is a short little video. This shows a section of a mouse brain, and the section is half the size of a grain of sand. Every color indicates a different type of activity. This is a mouse brain section that's just half the size of a grain of sand. Look at all the different activity that's going on. This shows how absolutely daunting it is for someone to study the human brain. Such a small section, every color is a different kind of activity. That's amazingly complex. And that's just a mouse. And so, looking at that, you realize human studies involving the brain are so new. When there can be so much different activity in that one little spot, how can you draw conclusions from a generalized scan of the entire brain? There's a lot more work to do. Another principle, X does not always mark the spot. Find X. There it is. Little algebra joke. The idea of X marks the spot, that is when they ask you to pray, something scans up, lights up on the scanner, and you say, that's where prayer is. X marks the spot. The problem is there's an assumption that's been disproved. Like, okay, once you find an area of the brain that's responsible for something, that's its only function? No. The brain is very versatile. One area can serve many functions. The same little neuron path can handle driving home, and when you stop driving, it might take over emotion. There's not a one-to-one relationship. And a slight variation in the task can change the brain to an entirely different area. In a brain scan, again, they reproduced the love study and asked the person to slightly tap their foot during the study. A completely different area lit up. Just by slightly moving your feet. And this is a big no-no. You can't go revert, they call it reverse inference. You can't reason backward. Say, what you can do, you can observe someone in an action and see what part of the brain is related. So if I'm scared, you say, oh, that part of the amygdala lights up. Amygdala is a part of the brain that deals with fear and many other things. And so it's, okay, when you're feeling scared, that part of the brain lights up. You can say that. What you cannot say is that, I'm just looking at your scanner, I see the amygdala lighting up, therefore you must be afraid. You can go one way, you can't go the other way. It's a logical fallacy. It'd be like saying, all pigeons are birds. Okay, but you can't go backwards. All birds are pigeons. No. There's a lot of examples. A lot of popular reports on brain studies commit this error. Some more famous ones, in the last election, they scanned a bunch of women being shown the picture of Mitt Romney. And they saw the amygdala light up. And it was a big news. They said, okay, the amygdala, that's associated with fear. These women fear Mitt Romney. And so they go back to Mitt and tell him that he needs to change his campaign, change his emphasis on women, because brain scans were showing that they were afraid of him. They probably could have asked the women. But the problem is, the amygdala can do lots of other things, including regulating sexual attraction, which would have been a completely different news report. They didn't mention that. Another famous study was they scanned people. They scanned religiously devout people, saw what part of the brain lit up. And then they scanned iPhone users when they were shown pictures of iPhones, or imagined walking into iPhone stores. And they saw the same part of the brain lit up. And all over the news was, iPhone users are in love with their iPhones the same way that religiously devout people are in love with God. But the thing is, they're going backwards. You can't do that. You can't look at a scan and say, this is what the person must be feeling. Correlation does not imply causation. I used to think correlation implied causation. Then I took a statistics class. Now I don't. Sounds like the class helped. Well, maybe. This is where two things are related, but it doesn't mean that one causes the other. This is also all over the news and news reports. They find a spot and think, it causes it. Not necessarily. I use a couple cute examples. Just because two things occur together does not mean one causes the other. The deadly facts about water. Fact. Water can be chemically synthesized by burning rocket fuel. Overconsumption can cause sweating, urination, and even death. 100% of all serial killers and drug dealers have admitted to drinking water. Water is one of the primary ingredients in herbicides and pesticides, and it's the leading cause of drowning. Everyone who is exposed to water will eventually die. Stop water. It's a silly example. Two things that are related don't necessarily cause each other. Another one I like. Every time the pilot turns on the seatbelt sign, it gets bumpy. He should stop doing that. And there's some people who work in statistics run these same things, run graphs of things that are correlated for fun. And this is a graph where they correlated the statistic. The blue line is autism throughout the years, and the red line is organic food sales. Conclusion, of course, stop feeding your kids organic. Organic food is causing autism. Because they chart that they go together. Doesn't mean one causes the other. So merely because a part of the brain is active in a task doesn't mean it causes it. So if you see the word cause in any type of study, automatically we need to step back. This is also the Mozart effect. Another book cover pulled straight from Amazon, tapping the power of music to heal the body, strengthen the mind, and unlock the creative spirit. And this is actually a picture where they are in a nursery pumping Mozart to these little sleeping children. Real picture. Because it's supposed to make them smarter. Problem is that they've studied this and realized, well, the basics where this comes from is they played Mozart to a bunch of people, a bunch of students right before they were going to take a test. And the students that heard the music did better on the test than those who did not. And so they said, Mozart obviously makes people smarter. Problem was, is then they went back and realized that the music helped wake the students up. They became more aroused and more energized when they heard music, and so they did a little better on the test. And they've gone back and tried different music, and found some of the more modern rock tended to do even better than Mozart. The one that did the best was a song, Country House by Blur. It hit the top of the chart. You don't hear modern rock makes people smarter. It just had to do with becoming more awake before a test. But yet it gets all the way in the news to where they're giving music to babies. And they're not going to be taking a test anytime soon, I hope. Point 7. Be very cautious when applying animal studies to humans. I see this a lot, especially in dietary studies. They feed mice and rats a whole bunch of, say, aspartame. The mice and rats get sick. And they come back and say, this aspartame will make you sick. Maybe. If you eat 10 gallons a day. When it comes down to brain studies, most brain studies are done on mice and rats. And so what happens if we go back to how studies are publicized? So the scientist says, we cut open the mouse brain and found this. The PR department puts out, we found this in a brain, little print with mice. By the time it hits the news, we found this in your brain. And I've seen dozens of reports in the news about people brains that are only based on mouse studies. Mostly because a lot of the studies that they do on mice would be completely unethical to do on people. Which I'm glad they're not doing them on people. But still, you have to be cautious. The assumption is that the human brain is like all other animals, just more developed. The reality is brain structure and organization vary widely across species. Scientists are told to be careful extrapolating results from one mouse strain to another mouse strain. If it works on one mouse strain, don't assume it's going to be the same for a different kind of mouse. But yet the news reports jump from mice to people very easily. And they'll often not even say that they studied mice, leaving it up to the reader to assume it was people. Go to the source. Here, we've run out of lab rats, Henderson. Put this on and come with us. Uh-oh. Mice are mice, people are people. You do need to start somewhere in studies. Scientists may say mice are used because they serve as a good model for humanity. Well, the reality is mice are used because they are cheap and plentiful. That's the reality. Don't ignore animal studies, but the good ones will actually explain why they make the jump and why they can make the jump from mouse to human. The bad ones won't. We thought you'd like to meet Reggie. He's the rat we experimented on to find a cure for you. So there are good animal studies. You just have to be cautious. Here I go to some parts that are very applicable to the religious scene. For brain scans, one thing it has told us is head and heart are integrated. They go together. I'll discuss this in a moment. Yeah, the self-esteem study. Very positive self-esteem there. A lot of times we've been taught to believe there are parts of the brain that are associated with emotion, and there are parts of the brain that are associated with rationality. What brain scans have taught us is that that's not true. Scientists today have pretty much abandoned the idea that there's a separate emotional center. Rationality and emotion are so integrated together. You say, but I can overrule emotions. Say, I get up here and have a bout of fear of speaking. Well, my rational mind can say, stop that, keep talking. But even doing that is a result of emotion of wanting to stay up and keep speaking. Emotion serves a purpose of helping you know, what do I notice? I notice what's emotionally meaningful, and it encodes the stuff that's tagged with emotion, gets put in your memory. If your emotion doesn't tag it as important, drifts away. In a study that illustrates this, was a study on low self-esteem. The low self-esteem affected deeply how someone actually processed information. The people with the really low self-esteem only remembered the negative stuff. Positive stuff could happen, but they would never notice it because their emotions were in a different place. They were unable to register anything positive that came up. Oh, I did really well. They wouldn't even remember it. Someone liked me, they wouldn't remember it. And this is the kicker. They actually changed past memories to fit the present emotions. And so they'll go back, say, I'm a different person today, I have these certain emotions. They would go back and rewrite their own memories from the past to fit how they felt today. Emotions are powerful effects on how you think and your rational mind. What you see, what you remember, and the content of your memories depends on emotion. This is how the brain works. Sir, we are receiving information that conflicts with the core belief system. Get rid of it. What that tells me, especially for science teaching religion, is that as churches, we need to be developing both because they all work together. There's no separate systems. And instead of suppressing emotion, maybe train people's emotions to want the right things. So they start remembering the right things, noticing the right things. Someone gets excited about God, they're going to start noticing God things. Whereas when they're not excited, they won't. Or train someone morally to get excited about virtue. Then they will notice opportunities to be altruistic and to serve and to be virtuous. Whereas if they weren't excited about that, they wouldn't even notice. Another one, you've probably all seen studies, nature and nurture. How much is nature, how much is someone born with? And then how much is the influence of how you were raised? Problem is, any study that says that, they're rarely good. Studies that say what is percent is biological and what is environment are numerous. Why can't you take responsibility for your own actions? I blame my upbringing. Studies that say this are rarely good because it's always both. Behavior doesn't come from nowhere. It's going to light up the brain. It's going to be part of the brain. It's going to be part of the genes. So yeah, everything is 100% biological, but it's also 100% how you were raised. With a few exceptions like skin color, but even that's influenced by the environment. If I stay out in the sun, I'm going to be a lot more red. To quote a very famed neuroscientist, Jack Panksepp, and even the critics of science say he does a pretty good job. No specific thoughts or behaviors are directly inherited. Nature provides the potential, and nurture provides the opportunities for how these potentials can be manifested in diverse ways. There's nothing that's 100% you were born that way. It's okay, you're born with potentials. And it's all 100% biological, but then how do these potentials become who you are today? Depends a lot on your choices and your upbringing, the people around you. It's both. The mechanical brain, an X-ray. Brains change. Homer, let's just do this, brain, so I can go back to killing you with beer. Brains change, and this is a little bit of what I talked about last time I was here. The idea of plasticity. The brain is not the same today as it was yesterday, as it was 10 years ago. A thing called plasticity. And that is, your brain actually changes its shape. Your neurons grow or weaken depending on what you do. There's a little statement called use it or lose it. If you're using a neuron pathway and practicing, it grows really strong. If you're not using it, it weakens, loosens up, and that particular thought or behavior doesn't fire as quickly. Brains will change. Or if two things happen together, they become associated. I use an example. This was a riddle I posed last time I was here about, we had a group of addicts. For those of you that don't know, before I began to study this stuff, I was a chaplain at a long-term drug and alcohol rehab facility, working with addicts with very damaged brains, trying to help them become sober. And I did that for 7 years. And so we had a population among the addicts where every 2 weeks they would get an intense craving. No matter what they were doing, 2 weeks, bam. It really puzzled us until we realized these were the addicts that in their former life before coming to rehab were able to hold a job in their addiction. Every 2 weeks was payday. And so even though they were no longer receiving a check, their internal clock had wired to their addiction. Their body knew when it was 2 weeks and said, oh, now it's time to get the drug. But I've been in rehab for 6 months. Why are you still telling me this? Because the nerve pathways had grown so much together. It's the science behind triggers. Two things can become associated. Brains change. You form new associations. Like, example, say you experience some kind of trauma. And the negative emotions become associated with that particular experience. But spend time in a safe environment of counseling, telling that story, then the memories and the pain loosen up and become associated instead with a safe environment, and then you can actually tell your story without reliving the experience in the same amount of pain. It's your brain working, changing. Your brain is always reorganizing. The same behavior can be supported by different regions at different times of development, or when a new skill is learned. You learn something new, your whole brain map's going to change. You see studies on, buy this product and it'll help you stave off Alzheimer's. Well, most of the time, no. Two things, though, that will help. Learn something brand new, like a new language or a new instrument, something you've never been exposed to before. That'll reorganize your brain and get a lot of nerves growing. That actually does work. But it has to be something completely new, not an old skill that you already know a lot. It'll reorganize your brain. Here's the idea of right brain and left brain, the creative side, the logical side. Where this comes from is a study, what they did with epileptics, people with such severe seizures that the neuroscientists and the brain surgeons went in with a saw and cut down right through the middle of someone's brain, completely separating one side from the other. And that stops the seizures, because seizures are activity that jumps from side to side so fast that it seizes you up. So they just cut the connections. But then they realized once they did this, people developed a personality on one side versus a personality on the other. They became almost two different people. You have trouble understanding the God as Trinity? Sit back and think of the fact that you could be two different people combined into one. They just cut down the middle of your brain. And they realized that one side tended to be more creative than the other side. They'd cover people's one eye to access one side of the brain, and realized that what you learned out of this eye, when you'd switch, this eye would not be able to recall the information, because the information only went through this side to one side, and the sides could no longer communicate. A lot of very, very interesting stuff. Or the sides would begin to fight. Or the left side gets so frustrated, so they cover this eye learns the information, then they switch, and the left side says, I want to know the information, I'm getting so frustrated, and gets so angry, and then switch back. But that's where the idea of right brain, left brain comes from. But in people where they haven't sawed your brain in half, the brain works as a whole. So right brain and left brain might be true if you've been operated on and they've cut your brain in half. But it's only true for that circumstance. If your brain is intact, both sides work together to accomplish logic and creativity. It all works together. This is another application. It's why the idea of neuro-law is ridiculous. Because you cannot say an adult brain, you can't scan an adult brain and say, well, that's the way they were when they were born. Brains change. You can't even say that was the way the person's brain was last week. And so you scan a criminal and say, wow, look at these odd little blips happening. It must have been what causes criminal behavior, so you need to go light on it. That may not be the way the brain was when he committed the crime. The very fact of committing the crime could have been such a big life event that his whole brain got reorganized because of committing that crime, and now he has this completely new scan by the time you get the court date, which is usually months removed from the actual crime. The only way you can say this is the way the person was born based on a scan is if you scanned them when they were born. Because a person's brain changes. And that covers the various points, talking about neuroscience, how to interpret it. And now I just opened it up to questions.